Winter's bite clung to the small depot at Dodge City, where iron wheels had barely cooled from the morning train. The air was sharp with coal smoke and the faint scent of horses, mingling with the sound of boots on warped planks. It was a place where hope and heartbreak stepped off side by side. Farmers came for supplies, drifters waited for the next westbound, and every so often, a bride stepped down with a trunk, chasing a promise she prayed was real. That morning, eyes turned as one such bride descended from the carriage. Her bonnet sat low, shading her features, but no hat could hide what the gossiping crowd would soon whisper about. The brim tilted, and the scar caught the light long, puckered, a burn that ran from temple to jaw. Children stared too openly. Mothers hushed them with sharp fingers on their sleeves. Her name was Clara Whitmore. She held herself stiff, clutching a valise with the poise of someone who had rehearsed courage for weeks. She had left behind Pennsylvania mills and the ghost of factory fire. Out here, she thought, men would measure her by work and loyalty, not by the marks fate had branded across her skin. A letter had promised as much: steady land, a man of decent character, and a chance at belonging. But promises made in ink often smudge in the light of day. Clara scanned the depot platform, searching for Henry Blake, the man whose letters had coaxed her across 1,000 miles. Instead, she found silence. Cowboys leaned on posts, chewing the day's boredom. A freight clerk scribbled on a clipboard. And then, near the corral, a man in a new vest approached, his jaw set like someone rehearsing words he did not want to speak. "Miss Whitmore?" His voice carried, louder than courtesy required. She nodded, stepping forward with the faintest of smiles. The man hesitated, then pulled his hat low. "I'm Henry Blake." He swallowed. I can't. I thought I could, but I can't." The words struck harder than a slap. Murmurs rippled across the platform. Clara's grip on her valise tightened until the leather creaked. "I crossed the country," she said, her voice level but brittle. "You asked me." Henry's gaze darted to the scar, then away, as if ashamed of his own shame. "It's not what I expected. The men at the ranch, they'd never let me live it down. I can't bring you back with me. You'll find someone else." With that, he turned, boots thudding against the planks, leaving her standing beneath the full weight of 100 eyes. Her heart pounded, not just with hurt, but with the old familiar anger that always threatened when someone looked at her face and decided it told her whole story. She would not cry. She would not beg. Yet the depot stretched endless around her, and loneliness pressed like the cold wind. She was a woman alone in a land that ate the weak. Silence thickened, broken only when a voice, steady and low, cut across the shame. "If you'll have me, miss, you're wanted at my table." Heads turned. A tall man stepped forward, his shoulders broad from years of work, his clothes plain but well kept. His face carried its own weather lines, carved by grief as much as by sun. He did not look away from her scar. He looked into her eyes. "My name's Thomas Hale," he said. "I keep a ranch west of here. Been some years since I buried my wife. My boys could use a mother. I could use someone who knows what it means to endure." Clara's breath caught. She had no script for this moment. The crowd waited, their curiosity sharpening like knives. "Why?" she managed, her voice almost a whisper. Thomas gave a half shrug. because I reckon scars don't scare me. Only men who run from them do. The murmur that rose now was different, low, startled, tinged with the electricity of a scene no one had expected. Ranch hands shifted, some smirking, others frowning. The depot clerk froze mid-scribble, and Henry Blake, halfway to his horse, turned back with a face burning red. Clara's throat ached with words unsaid, but something in Thomas's gaze steadied her. In that silence, she found the faint echo of belonging she had prayed might exist. And, for the first time since the fire, her heart dared to wonder if rejection was not the end, but the beginning. The platform remained hushed, as if the wind itself had stopped to listen. Clara felt every eye bore into her, waiting for her to falter, waiting for her to show weakness. Her chest rose and fell too fast, but she lifted her chin, refusing to give them that satisfaction. Thomas Hale stood firm before her, not flinching from the scar that had driven another man to shame. His voice carried no pity, no false kindness. Only steadiness. It was that steadiness that unnerved her most of all. "You don't know me," she said, words sharp as the winter air. "You don't know what I've come from or what I carry." "I don't need to," Thomas answered. "I see enough in how you're standing right now." Any woman left at a depot with nothing but a trunk and her pride, and still holding her ground, that's someone worth knowing. The words were simple, yet they struck deeper than any flowery promise Henry Blake's letters had carried. Henry's voice rose from the edge of the crowd. "This ain't your concern, Holly. She's my business, and I said it's done." Thomas turned, his stance calm but unyielding. "You made it everyone's business the moment you brought her out here and left her on the boards like a broken tool. A man's worth is shown in how he keeps his word." A few ranch hands chuckled under their breath, and Henry's face darkened, but he said nothing more. Clara's knees trembled. She wanted to retreat, to vanish into shadow, but there was nowhere to go. So she stood beside the stranger who had stepped forward, not knowing whether he was salvation or another kind of mistake. "I've no dowry," she said finally, her voice measured. "No family to vouch for me. And my scars," she touched her cheek, her fingers brushing the raised flesh like an old enemy. "They frighten men." Thomas's gaze did not waver. "They don't frighten me. You're standing here. That tells me more than any smooth face ever could." Something shifted in her chest, a crack in the wall she had built since the fire, since the whispers that followed her through town streets. Back east, he spoke as if the scars were not her curse, but her proof of survival. Yet she could not trust so easily. "Why would you make such an offer to a stranger? Out of pity?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "I buried my wife 5 winters past. My boys were small then. They've grown up fast, too fast, with no woman to soften the house. I'm not a man for pity. I'm a man who knows loneliness. And I reckon you know it too." His honesty disarmed her. It was not a declaration of love, nor a rescuer's gallant boast. It was loneliness calling to loneliness, and it rang truer than anything else she had heard since stepping off the train. The silence stretched until a whistle from down the track announced another engine's approach. Smoke trailed against the pale sky. The depot would soon bustle again, and the moment would vanish. Clara's choice stood like a forked road. Walk away, clutching the sting of rejection, or step into the unknown beside this widower who looked at her not with pity, but with recognition. Her fingers whitened around the handle of her valise. She lifted it slowly, not to leave, but to shift her weight toward Thomas. "If you mean your words, then take me with you," she said. The murmur in the crowd swelled. Some voices scoffed. Others hissed with surprise. Thomas only inclined his head, as if sealing a pact. "Then let's be on." He reached for her trunk. His grip was steady, his movements unhurried. He did not glance around to see who watched, nor did he wait for approval. That, too, steadied her. As they stepped away from the depot, Henry Blake spat into the dirt, muttering curses that burned with more than wounded pride. "You'll regret it, Hale. That scarred woman will ruin you." Thomas didn't turn. Clara, however, did. Her gaze met Henry's for one lingering second. She said nothing, but the silence carried its own sharp edge. Then she walked on, leaving him behind. The wagon stood ready, a sturdy vehicle lined with burlap sacks and the smell of hay. Thomas set her trunk in the back, then offered his hand to help her climb. She hesitated, her pride whispering against dependency, but accepted it. His hand was rough, scarred with old ranch work, yet it held her as if she mattered. The horses snorted, impatient to move. As the wheels creaked forward, Clara looked back one last time at the depot shrinking behind them. A chapter had closed, harsh and humiliating. Yet ahead stretched the prairie wild, wide, untamed. For the first time in years, possibility rose. Faintly in her chest, it did not erase the fear, but it gave her something stronger than fear, a chance. The wagon rolled westward, wheels creaking in steady rhythm against the rutted trail. Clara sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, every jolt of the road echoing the unease in her chest. The prairie opened wide before them, endless grass, rolling beneath the pale winter sun. Wind pressed at her bonnet and pulled stray strands of hair against her scarred cheek. She had expected to feel shame, the way she always did when strangers noticed the mark. But Thomas Hale's silence carried no judgment. He kept his attention on the team, guiding them with steady hands, his frame upright but not stiff. He was a man accustomed to solitude, and his quiet carried weight rather than emptiness. At length, Clara spoke. "You said you have sons." Thomas nodded. "2. Samuel is 12, Matthew 10. They've known more chores than play these past years. Boys grow restless when there's no mother's hand to temper them. I manage, but I'm not enough." Clara imagined them young faces hardened by work, eyes carrying too much loss. A pang stirred in her chest. Do they remember their mother well? His jaw shifted. Every day. "I keep her picture on the mantel. They speak of her often." He paused, then added, "I wouldn't ask you to replace her. Asterisk, no one can, but a home needs more than one set of hands. And I saw something in you back there, a will to endure. My boys could learn from that." Clara turned her gaze outward, where the land stretched unbroken. No trees, no mills, no brick. Houses of the East, only earth and sky, fierce and unrelenting. "Endurance," she echoed softly. "That's all I've known since the fire." He glanced at her then, not quickly, not furtively, but openly. "Fire did that?" She touched her cheek lightly. The skin was ridged, pale against the cold. Asterisk, yes. Factory caught in the night. I was 15. Father pulled me out. but the beams fell. She let the words trail, the memory heavy with smoke and screams. He worked iron, a blacksmith. He saved me, though the fire claimed him. Thomas said nothing for a long stretch of road, only guided the horses until the depot was a shadow behind them. Finally he murmured, "A man who saves his child at the cost of his life, that's a legacy no flame can burn." Her throat tightened, and she turned her face toward the wind. She had not expected kindness to hurt more than cruelty. The trail climbed a low ridge, and beyond it the land opened into a shallow valley dotted with cattle. Smoke curled from a distant chimney. The sight pulled Thomas straighter in his seat. There it is, Hale Ranch. Clara studied it carefully. A long, low house of timber stood against the slope, weathered but solid. Corrals stretched wide, cattle moving slow and heavy in the pale light. A barn rose beyond, its roof patched in places. It was not grandeur. It was not ease. But it was life, staked against the wilderness. Her heart beat faster. She had imagined arriving at a stranger's door with a contract sealed by letters and photographs. Instead, she was carried into a life chosen in a single moment at a depot. Would his sons welcome her? Would the hands whisper behind her back the way the depot crowd had? As if sensing her unease, Thomas said, "It won't be easy. My foreman's a decent man, but ranch hands are quick with their tongues. They'll test you, same as they test me. But this place," he gestured across the valley, "this is what I've built with my own 2 hands. It's all I have to offer." The horses slowed as the wagon reached the yard. 2 boys burst from the barn, one lanky, one shorter, both with hair tousled by wind. Samuel, the elder, shouted, "Pa, you're back." They skidded to a halt when they saw Clara. Their eyes flicked to her scar, then to their father, then back. Again, silence hung, heavy as a storm cloud. "This is Miss Whitmore," Thomas said evenly. "She be staying with us." Samuel's mouth tightened, suspicion sharpening his gaze. Matthew, younger, tilted his head with open curiosity. Neither spoke. Clara gripped her valise, summoning every ounce of composure. She had faced fire, she had faced rejection, and now she faced the eyes of children who did not know whether to claim her. The moment stretched, fragile as glass. Then Matthew blurted, "Do you know how to cook?" Clara blinked, startled. "Yes," she said softly. He grinned, wide and toothy. "Good, Pa burns everything." Thomas exhaled through his nose, half a laugh, half relief. The tension eased, if only slightly. Clara stepped onto the ground of Hale Ranch, the prairie wind tugging at her skirts, and felt the first faint tremor of something she had not dared to believe in. A beginning. Life at Hale Ranch began without ceremony. Clara unpacked her trunk in a small upstairs room, its walls bare save for a quilt folded neatly on the bed. The boards creaked, the window rattled faintly in the prairie wind, and the air carried the smell of wood smoke and cattle. It was not the life she had imagined when she first answered Henry Blake's letter months ago, but then, nothing about her journey had gone as imagined. By evening, the kitchen filled with the sound of pots and the rich smell of stew. Clara moved quietly, setting onions to fry, while Matthew darted in and out of the doorway with questions. "Do you know how to ride? Do you like dogs? Can you make biscuits like Ma used to?" His words tumbled like water over stones. Samuel, by contrast, lingered in silence. He leaned against the wall, his eyes sharp, watchful, carrying a weight too heavy for 12 years. When Clara asked him to fetch the salt, he did so without a word, placing it on the table with a soft thud. At supper, the four of them sat together. For the first time, Thomas bowed his head briefly, murmuring grace, and they ate. The stew was hearty, the bread warm. For a time, there was only the scrape of spoons and the creak of chairs. Then Matthew grinned through a mouthful. "This is better than Pa's cooking." Samuel shot him a look, but even Thomas's lips curved faintly. Clara allowed herself a small smile, though her hands trembled beneath the table. She had cooked meals before, but never with so much at stake, not just filling bellies, but proving her worth. Later that night, when the boys were sent upstairs, Thomas lingered by the hearth. The flames threw shadows against the walls. Clara folded her hands in her lap, unsure if she should speak first. "You did well," Thomas said simply. "The boys will test you, Samuel most of all. But Matthew, he'll warm quick. He's young enough still to hope." Clara looked into the fire. "And Samuel," Thomas rubbed his jaw. "He remembers his mother more clearly. He guards her memory. You'll have to earn his trust, slow as it comes." The honesty steadied her. Better truth than false comfort. She nodded. "I understand." For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackle of wood. Then Thomas added, "The hands will talk. They'll talk about you, about me bringing you home. Don't let it bite deep. They bark more than they bite." Clara's fingers touched her scar unconsciously. "I've lived with whispers most of my life. I can endure theirs too." The next morning proved his words. As Clara stepped into the yard, a cluster of ranch hands paused in their work. There. Laughter died as their eyes followed her across the dirt. She heard one mutter low, Hale's desperate, taking in a scarred stray. Another chuckled. "Better than burning his own supper, I guess." Clara stiffened, every muscle begging her to retreat inside. But she forced herself forward, chin high, skirt swaying with measured steps. She carried a basket of bread she had baked, offering it to the men without a word. They hesitated, then one accepted, muttering thanks. The others followed. She returned to the house with her heart pounding, but her back unbent. Later, she caught Thomas watching her from the barn. He said nothing, but the nod he gave her was worth more than words. Days turned into a rhythm. Chores filled the hours: milking, washing, cooking, tending to the boys. The prairie wind never ceased, whistling through cracks in the house. At night, Clara lay awake, listening to the cattle lowing in the distance, the boards shifting under the weight of winter cold. It was not easy. Samuel's silence remained sharp. The hands' whispers lingered. But Matthew's laughter brightened. Corners of the house long left dim. And Thomas carried himself with a steadiness that made even silence feel safe. One evening, as Clara hung laundry on the line, Samuel approached. He stood stiff, his arms crossed. Finally, he asked, "Why'd you come here? Why didn't you stay back east?" She paused, clothespin in hand. "Because I thought I'd been chosen," she said simply. "But when I wasn't, I had to choose for myself. And I chose not to give up." Samuel studied her, his eyes flicking to her scar. His mouth tightened, but he gave a short nod before walking away. It was the first crack in the wall between them. Small, fragile, but real. Clara let the prairie wind tug at the sheets and felt, for the first time in many years, that perhaps she had stepped into a place where her scars might not only be endured, but might find purpose. Spring crept over the plains with slow, stubborn steps. The snowmelt swelled the creek, calves bawled in the pastures, and the smell of damp earth rose each morning with the fog. Clara had settled into the rhythm of ranch life, her days stitched, with chores and the laughter sometimes grudging, sometimes bright, of two boys learning to accept her presence. Yet the shadow of the depot still lingered. Henry Blake's rejection clung to her like smoke. Clara told herself she was stronger now, but some nights, when the house was quiet and the fire burned low, she heard again the way his voice had cracked across the platform. "I can't. I thought I could, but I can't." She touched her scar in those moments, tracing its ridges as though to remind herself it was real. And then she forced herself to stop, to turn instead toward the steady presence of Thomas Hale. He did not speak of pity, did not offer hollow comfort, but when his gaze met hers, it carried something sturdier respect. One afternoon, Clara walked the fence line with a basket of food for the men. The wind carried voices ahead of her, rough and sharp. "Can you believe, Hale?" one hand muttered, bringing her like she's fit for the place. "She's marked plain as day. Bad luck, if you ask me." "Bad luck for Blake," another replied with a laugh. "Imagine paying for a bride and then passing her off." Hale picked up what was left. Their laughter stung more than the cold. Clara's hand tightened on the basket. For a heartbeat she wanted to turn back, hide in the kitchen where whispers could not reach her. But then her father's voice rose, in her memory gruff and certain. "Hold your ground, Clara. Iron bends if you let it. Don't let them see you bend." She walked forward, her steps even. The men fell silent as she approached. Without a word, she set the basket down, uncovered the bread and cheese, and met their eyes one by one. "You'll eat better with a full mouth and a sharp tongue," she said quietly. The words landed like hammer strikes. A few men shifted uncomfortably. One gave a grudging nod. Clara turned and walked back to the house, her spine unbroken. Behind her, silence lingered longer than laughter. That night at supper, Samuel surprised her with a question. "Pa says there'll be branding this week. Can you ride a horse?" Clara looked up, startled. "I can. My father kept a mare for hauling coal and iron." Samuel's brow furrowed. "Think you can help with the drive?" Before Clara could answer, Thomas cut in gently. "She's done more than enough already." But Clara caught the challenge in Samuel's eyes, the test he had not voiced outright. "If there's work to do, I'll do it," she said. The days that followed proved grueling. The herd was restless, calves bawling, dust rising thick under the spring sun. Clara mounted a chestnut gelding, her skirts pinned tight, her scar burning under the heat of men's glances. She had not ridden in years, yet her hands found the reins with memory's surety. When a calf broke from the herd, Clara spurred forward. The horse leapt, and she swung wide, guiding the animal back with shouts sharp enough to carry. The hands watched, surprised, some even grinning despite themselves. By dusk, Clara was filthy, her hair falling loose, her arms trembling from strain. But she had not faltered. She had kept pace. That night, as she scrubbed her hands raw in the wash basin, Samuel lingered by the doorway. "You ride better than some of the men," he muttered. Clara looked up, astonished by the faintest curl of respect in his voice. Before she could answer, he slipped away. But her heart steadied with something new, a foothold in the wall he had built around himself. Later, when Thomas banked the fire, his eyes met hers across the hearth. He didn't speak, but the faint nod he gave her was enough. The whispers still lingered outside. But inside Hale Ranch, a seed of belonging had begun to take root. The prairie sky stretched wide and merciless, pale blue giving way to streaks of crimson as evening fell. Clara had spent the day mending shirts, the rhythm of needle and thread steadying her thoughts. The boys' laughter echoed faintly from outside, where they played a rough game of tag among the fence posts. Thomas was away in the south pasture, checking on a sick calf. For a rare moment, peace hung over Hale Ranch. Then the sound of hooves shattered it. Clara rose, heart thudding. She stepped to the porch, just as a rider emerged from the dust of the trail. The man sat tall in the saddle, his vest too fine for ranch work, his expression twisted with something between anger and entitlement. Henry Blake. Clara's breath caught. For weeks, she had replayed the depot scene in her mind, his rejection like an echo that would not fade. Now he was here, flesh and blood, arrogance still clinging to him like perfume. He reined in sharply, dismounting with a practiced swagger. "Clara," he said, as if her name belonged to him. "You've found yourself a roof." The boys had gone still, eyes wide. Clara held herself tall, though her hands trembled at her sides. "Why are you here, Henry?" he smirked. "Why?" "To set things right. I made a mistake at the depot, sure. A man gets rattled sometimes, says what he doesn't mean. But I've thought it over. You came for me, Clara. I sent for you, and I don't like others claiming what's mine." The words curdled in her stomach. She remembered standing alone on that platform, the burn of humiliation in her chest. She remembered his eyes darting to her scar, his voice cracking with disgust. Now he spoke as if she were property, as if her pain were an inconvenience he could rewrite. "I'm not yours," she said firmly. His grin faded. "Don't play stubborn. You think a widower like Hale can give you better than me? I've land, money, men who follow my word. You'll live easier under my roof." The door creaked open behind her. Thomas stepped out, dust on his boots, his face unreadable. "Evening. Evening." "Blake," Henry's jaw tightened. "Hale, I came to take back what was mine." Thomas moved to stand beside Clara, not in front of her, but shoulder to shoulder. "She's not yours to take. She makes her own choice." Henry scoffed. "You'd pit your scraps of land against what I've built? You'll ruin her, Hale. She deserves better than to waste her life here, cooking and cleaning for a man too stubborn to hire help." Clara felt heat rise in her chest, a fire that burned deeper than shame. She stepped forward, her voice steady. "Better to work and be wanted than to sit in comfort and be despised." The boys gaped at her boldness, but Thomas's lips curved faintly, pride flickering in his eyes. Henry's face darkened. "You'll regret this, Clara, and you, Hale, you'll rue the day you crossed me. Men don't forget debts. I'll have her yet." He swung onto his horse and spurred away, dust trailing behind him like smoke from a fire left smoldering. Silence pressed heavy on the yard. Samuel spoke first, his voice cautious. "Pa, Is he coming back? Thomas's gaze followed the fading rider. Maybe, but if he does, we'll be ready. Clara's heart pounded, but not from fear alone. For the first time since the fire, since the depot, since every whisper that told her she was less than whole, she had stood her ground, and she had not stood alone. That night, after the boys had gone to bed, Thomas lingered by the hearth. The flames lit his face in gold and shadow. Clara sat across from him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "You faced him strong," Thomas said quietly. "I had to," she replied. Her voice shook now, the adrenaline gone. "If I let him, he'd drag me back into the same shame. I can't live under that again." Thomas nodded. "You won't. Not here." For a moment, silence stretched between them. The fire crackled, and Clara felt the weight of his words settle deep inside her. Not a promise of love, not yet, but of something sturdier: safety, respect, a place where her scars did not chain her. Outside, the wind swept over the plains, carrying with it the unspoken certainty Henry Blake would return, but so would her strength. The weeks that followed Henry Blake's visit carried an undercurrent of unease. Clara felt it in the way the ranch hands glanced toward the horizon when the work slowed, in the way Samuel kept his questions clipped, and even in Thomas's silence, heavier now than before. Blake's words lingered like a storm cloud, unseen but certain. Still, spring pressed forward. The land greened, calves grew strong, and the air carried the scent of wild sage. Clara found herself moving with more confidence through the rhythms of the ranch. She rose before dawn to start breakfast, rode fence lines with Thomas, and taught Matthew how to sew a button when his shirt tore clean through the sleeve. Even Samuel's stiffness softened slightly. He began asking her about her father's forge, about how fire bent iron into tools and horseshoes. For the first time, curiosity replaced suspicion in his eyes. It was on such a day, when the horizon shimmered with heat, that the warning came. A rider galloped in from the west pasture, his horse lathered, his face pale. Fire. He shouted, reining up so hard the animal skidded in the dust. Grass fires coming fast from Dry Creek. The word hit harder than any bullet. Clara's breath seized, her scar prickling as if the flames of her past had risen to life. She saw again the collapsing beams, her father's desperate shove, the choking black smoke. For an instant, the world tilted. But then Thomas's voice cut through the rising panic. "Round the herd, get the boys." Men scrambled, shouting, the air suddenly alive with fear. Smoke already smeared the horizon, a dark smear against the merciless blue sky. Wind drove it forward, hungry and unrelenting. Clara forced her body to move. She found Samuel and Matthew near the corral, their eyes wide with terror. "Inside, both of you," she barked, her voice sharper than she knew it could be. "Keep buckets ready by the well. Do not leave the house unless your pa calls you." Samuel hesitated, but Clara's eyes blazed. He grabbed Matthew's arm and dragged him inside. Turning back, she saw Thomas driving cattle with the hands, their shouts nearly drowned by the growing roar of fire. The smoke thickened, the wind carrying sparks that hissed in the dry grass. Panic rippled through the men. Some pulled the herd one way, others another, confusion wasting precious moments. Clara's chest heaved. She knew this chaos, had lived it before. And she knew the answer. Her father's voice rang in her memory. You can't fight fire head-on. You cut its fuel. You fight fire with fire. She seized a dropped torch from near the barn, her hands shaking but sure. She ran toward the upwind side of the pasture, where dry grass stretched unbroken. "Clara!" Thomas's shout chased her. "What are you doing?" She didn't stop. With one fierce motion, she struck the torch against flint and set the grass alight. Flames leapt, small but steady, licking there. Way across the earth, men gasped, some shouting curses. "She's lost her mind," one cried. But Clara's voice carried, sharp and commanding. "Backburn. Clear the line before it reaches us. Starve it of fuel, or we lose everything." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Thomas's eyes widened with recognition. "She's right. Drive it fast. Get water on the edges." The men sprang into action, beating at the fire's sides with wet sacks, widening the blackened strip Clara had started. Smoke burned her lungs, her scars searing with heat, but she did not stop. She ran alongside the flames, torch in hand, carving a barrier with fire to halt the inferno sweeping toward them. The wind howled, the sky turned red with smoke, and the air crackled with fury. Yet when the main fire reached the charred strip, it faltered. It hissed and clawed, but it found nothing to devour. Slowly, reluctantly, it died down, leaving behind only smoldering ash. The herd bawled, restless but alive. The men stood panting, their faces black with soot, their eyes wide with what they had witnessed. Thomas strode toward Clara, his chest heaving. You saved the herd. You saved us all." Clara dropped the spent torch, her hands trembling violently now that the danger had passed. Smoke stung her eyes, tears cutting clean tracks down her soot-streaked cheeks. "I only did what my father taught me," she whispered. The ranch hands looked at her differently now, not as a scarred woman taken in out of pity, but as someone who had faced the flames and bent them to her will. Respect replaced whispers. And in the fading light, as the prairie smoldered and the cattle settled, Clara realized she had fought not just fire on the land, but the fire that had haunted her for years, and this time she had won. The prairie lay scarred and blackened for miles, a wide swath of ash stretching where flames had once threatened to devour Hale Ranch. The smell of smoke lingered in the air for days, seeping into clothes, hair, and memory. Yet amid the ruin, life held steady. The herd grazed in safety, the house stood unscathed, and the men spoke Clara's name with new weight in their voices. In the bunkhouse, whispers carried differently now. Where once men sneered about Hale's scarred stray, they now muttered with a grudging respect. "Never seen a woman stand to fire like that," one admitted. "Near outpaced us all," another added. They spoke of her not as pity, but as strength. Clara felt the shift in the air each morning. Hands greeted her with nods instead of stares, and Samuel, quiet but watchful, began to walk beside her during chores, asking questions about the forge, about how her father had taught her the ways of fire. For the first time she saw admiration flicker in his eyes, yet not everyone welcomed the change. Word of her bravery spread faster than smoke, and with it came new whispers beyond the ranch. At the mercantile, women drew close to one another, casting sideways glances at Clara as she shopped with Matthew. "Bold thing for a mail-order bride," one said under her breath. "Trying to play at men's work," another sniffed. a scarred face and a hero's tale. It won't last. Clara heard it all, but she walked with her head high, Matthew's small hand clasped in hers. When he looked up at her with pride shining in his eyes, the sting of gossip dulled. At supper one evening, the boys could hardly contain themselves. Matthew leaned across the table, eyes bright. "Tell it again, Miss Clara, how you lit the fire to stop the fire." Clara chuckled softly, shaking her head. "It wasn't magic, Matthew. Just what my father taught me. Fire obeys rules, same as iron. But you weren't scared?" Samuel asked, his voice hesitant, as though testing her. Clara's smile faded into something steadier. "Of course I was scared. Fire always frightens me. But fear doesn't. Mean you run. It means you find a way through." Samuel nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on her scar. This time there was no judgment in it, only understanding. Thomas, seated at the head of the table, watched in silence, his eyes unreadable. But later, when the boys had gone to bed, he lingered by the hearth. Clara folded laundry, the fire casting warm light across her face. "You've changed things here," he said finally. She looked up, startled. "Changed things?" "The men," he said. "The boys. Even me. We see you now. Not just as someone taken in, but as part of this place." Her chest tightened. She had longed for belonging since the depot, since the day fire marked her as different. To hear it spoken aloud made her throat ache with unspent tears. "I only did what had to be done." Thomas shook his head. "Plenty of men have failed doing what had to be done. Plenty of men have failed doing what had to be done. You didn't." Silence stretched between them, filled with the pop of the fire and the creak of the old house settling. For a fleeting moment, Clara wondered if something more lay beneath. His words, something softer, unspoken. But he turned away, busying himself with stoking the flames, and the moment passed. Days slipped into weeks. The prairie healed slowly, green shoots piercing the blackened earth. Hale Ranch bustled with renewed life. The herd thrived, the men worked harder, and Clara found herself woven deeper into the fabric of the household. She mended clothes, taught Matthew to read, and even coaxed a laugh from Samuel one evening when she teased him about his too serious brow. But shadows still lingered at the edge of peace. Henry Blake's words at the depot returned often in Clara's thoughts. "You'll regret this, Hale. I'll have her yet." She felt his absence like a storm waiting on the horizon. Every rider seen in the distance, every dust cloud rising on the trail, made her heart seize. She did not speak of it, not even to Thomas, but the fear simmered beneath her calm. One evening, as the family sat on the porch watching the sun sink, behind the plains, Samuel leaned against Clara's side. He pointed toward the horizon, where faint flowers sprouted among the ash. "Looks like the land's healing." Clara stroked his hair gently. "It always does. Fire clears what's weak, so the strong can grow." Her words settled into the quiet, and Thomas's eyes flicked toward her, thoughtful. In that moment, Clara realized she was no longer simply enduring Hale Ranch, she was becoming part of it. But she also knew the past was not done with her. Henry Blake was still out there, and men like him never let go of their pride without a fight. Summer settled heavy over Dodge City, the streets thick with dust and the air humming with heat. Clara rarely ventured into town, but on this day Thomas insisted. Supplies ran low, and with the ranch thriving after the fire, it was time to show. The community that Hale Ranch and the woman who helped save it stood strong. Clara's heart thudded as the wagon rolled past storefronts. Eyes followed her the way they always did, lingering too long on the scar. But something was different. This time, whispers trailed her steps, yes, but not all sharp with scorn. Some carried curiosity, some, even, respect. Inside the mercantile, the shopkeeper gave her a polite nod, his wife offering a smile tight but genuine. Clara held herself tall, meeting gazes without flinching. Matthew clutched her hand while Samuel carried the sack of flour with a seriousness that made her chest ache. It was then Henry Blake entered. The door creaked, and the room stiffened. Henry's presence filled it the way smoke filled the closed room thick, choking. He cut through the crowd with swagger, his eyes locking on Clara like a man laying claim. "Well," he drawled, loud enough for all to hear, "if it isn't the bride I sent for, how's Hale's table treating you, Clara?" A hush fell, every head turned. Clara felt her cheeks flame, but before shame could root her to the floor, she heard Thomas's voice steady, low, but carrying the force of an iron bar striking an anvil. "She's no one's cast-off, Blake. She saved my ranch when fire came down from the hills. My herd, my home, my boys, they stand because of her." The silence deepened. Henry's smirk faltered, just slightly. But pride would not let him yield. "A scarred woman playing at heroics, you call that saving? She'd bring you nothing but ridicule, Hale. You know it." Clara's heart pounded, but this time she would not let Thomas fight alone. She stepped forward, her voice clear enough to reach every corner of the room. "Ridicule?" she said. "Perhaps. I've known it all my life, but while you mocked, I acted. While you walked away, I stood. Ask any man who worked that fire. My scars did not weaken me. They warned me. They taught me to fight." The crowd stirred. A ranch hand who had been there during the backburn spoke up. "She saved the herd, Blake. No two ways about it. Without her, Hale would have lost everything." Another added, "Never seen a woman or a man stand to fire like that." The tide shifted. Murmurs swelled, not against Clara, but against Henry. He stiffened, color rising in his face. His eyes darted from one witness to another, realizing the crowd had slipped from his grip. "You'll regret this," he hissed, quieter now, meant for her alone. "You and Hale both." But Clara stood her ground, her chin high. "I've regretted nothing since the day I left you on that platform." Laughter broke from the crowd, rough and sharp, cutting Henry deeper than Clara's words alone. His pride, once so certain, withered under public scorn. With a curse, he shoved through the room and stormed out, the door slamming behind him. The silence that followed was heavy, but it held no shame for Clara. Instead, she felt the weight of something new, vindication. Thomas touched the brim of his hat toward her, his eyes meeting hers with quiet pride. "Shall we be on?" he asked. She nodded, her hands trembling only once she had turned back toward the wagon. The boys chattered excitedly, Matthew boasting about her bravery, Samuel grinning despite himself. As they rolled out of town, Clara allowed herself a breath she had been holding since the depot. The whispers had turned. The town no longer saw her as a scarred mistake, but as a woman of strength. Back at Hale Ranch, that shift blossomed further. The men treated her with respect. The boys clung to her more openly. And Thomas began to linger near her in the evenings, his silence. Warm, not distant. The scar still marked her face. But now, when she caught her reflection in the wash basin, she no longer saw only loss. She saw proof of survival. Proof that she had remade her life not by waiting for acceptance, but by standing tall against the fire, both real and human. The past had tried to brand her, but the present had rewritten her name. Autumn crept across the plains with copper light and long shadows. Hale Ranch moved with steady rhythm, cattle fattened, barns filled with hay, and the boys grew taller, their laughter carrying farther across the yard. Clara felt the seasons, turning not just on the land but within herself. Where once she had moved cautiously, uncertain of her place, now she walked with quiet surety. Her scars had not faded, yet they had changed. No longer were they a mark of rejection alone. To the ranch hands, they had become a badge of courage. To Samuel and Matthew, they were simply part of the woman who tucked them in at night. And to Thomas Hale, well, his eyes told her enough. Respect first, then trust, and slowly care. But the story did not end with fire and whispers silenced. Something greater still lay waiting. It began one crisp morning when Samuel burst into the house, breathless. Miss Clara. The smithy in town, Mr. Horner's leaving for Kansas. Says the forge'll be sold. Clara froze. The word forge stirred something deep within her. A place untouched since the night her father died, pulling her from the flames. Memories flooded back. The clang of hammer on iron, sparks leaping like fireflies, her father's voice teaching her how heat and patience could bend the strongest metal. That afternoon, Thomas asked gently, "You've thought about it, haven't you? Taking the forge?" Clara shook her head, torn. "It's men's work. The town will laugh." The town already laughed, Thomas reminded her. His voice was soft but firm. "And you silenced them. You saved this ranch when no man could think straight. Why not save a trade too?" She stared at him, her hands trembling slightly. "You believe I could?" "I believe you already have," he said simply. The decision weighed on her, but the pull of memory proved stronger than fear. Days later, Clara stood before the empty smithy, its anvil cold, the hearth filled with ash. Dust floated in the beams of sunlight, and silence pressed like a challenge. Her hand brushed the anvil's edge. She remembered standing beside her father, a girl with soot-streaked cheeks, watching him shape glowing metal into plows and horseshoes. She had thought those days lost forever. Yet here, in Dodge City, stood a forge waiting for new fire. The townsfolk gathered, curious. Whispers rose out, disbelief. "A scarred woman, a blacksmith," they scoffed. "What foolishness!" Clara heard it all, but she lit the forge anyway. Flames roared to life, licking up with hungry brilliance. She gripped the hammer, felt its weight settle into her palm like it belonged there, and struck iron. The sound rang clear, steady, undeniable. Each strike silenced more whispers. Sparks flew, fire reflected in her scar, and strength poured from her with every blow. By the day's end, she had shod a horse for the sheriff, mended a plow for a farmer, and forged her place in town with fire and iron. When she returned to Hale Ranch that evening, soot on her face, Thomas and the boys waited on the porch. Matthew ran to her first, wide-eyed. You really did it? You worked the forge?" She knelt, pulling him close. "I did, and I'll do it again." Samuel stood taller, pride flickering in his eyes. "Pa says no one else in town could have managed it." Thomas said nothing at first, only stepped closer, his gaze steady. Then, quietly, "Your father would be proud." The words broke something open inside her. She looked up at him, and in his face she saw no pity, no hesitation, only truth. For the first time, Clara allowed herself to imagine not just endurance, but love. The weeks that followed wove the final threads of her story. The town came to respect her craft. Farmers brought work, ranchers sought her skill, and children marveled at the sparks that flew like stars each time she struck iron. At Holly Ranch, she became more than guest or helper. She became home. On a golden afternoon, with wildflowers braided into her scar-side hair by Samuel and Matthew, Clara stood at the small chapel on the edge of town. Thomas took her hand, calloused and strong, and together they spoke vows that bound them not by pity or need, but by choice. The scar remained, but it no longer told of fire alone. It told of survival, of strength, of love forged in places no one expected. Clara Whitmore, once mocked and rejected, had become not just a bride, but a woman who remade her life in iron and flame. And when the townsfolk spoke of her in years to come, they did not speak of scars first. They spoke of the day she saved Holly Ranch. They spoke of the forge reborn. They spoke of the woman who taught them all that scars were not the end of a story, but the proof that the story continued. In the untamed heart of the Wild West, Clara Whitmore's story reminds us that scars do not define weakness, they prove survival. Rejected, mocked, and left behind, she found strength not only to save a ranch, but to forge a new life where respect, love, and purpose burned brighter than any flame. Her journey is one of redemption, resilience, and the power of choosing courage when the world looks away. If Clara's story moved you, thank you for staying with us until the end. Share this video with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment, we value every thought. Subscribe for more stories of love, grit, and the unbreakable spirit of the frontier.